with all my experience of Lyft and Uber and being a rideshare driver, I have to be honest, it has never been more difficult to decide if you should become an Uber driver or Lyft driver or not. There is a lot going on in the ride-sharing world, especially right now. So in this video, I really want to go in depth and talk about the 5 main specifics in terms of should you become a rideshare driver or not. Number 1, research. Now, I want to start off by saying I get right to the point in all my videos. I hate YouTubers that ramble on and kind of talk in circles and waste your time. When it comes to this starting point though, I want to start from the angle that I know it sounds kind of hypocritical because you're watching this video to decide should you drive or not. But my best advice right away, do research about your area. Most of my subscribers know what I'm about to say, but the number 1 factor that determines how much money you can make as a driver is your location. This is an infographic all the way back when in 2018 that depending on your location, you can make a good hourly rate or not so much. However, times are changing very quickly. It's not now just about, oh, well, can you make a lot of money or not? Because let's be honest, of course, you want to make a lot of money as a driver. You want to make maybe side cash, put food on the table, whatever the case is. But things are getting trickier by the day because now there's a lot of talk of drivers becoming independent contractors or employees. Are you protected by insurance or not? Things are rapidly changing. And what's very annoying about this, especially for you, is let's say if you live in an area like Miami or Houston, Texas, or LA or Boston, the decision to become a rideshare driver in some areas could be, yes, it's definitely worth it, but in other areas, not so much. And I know it's annoying to start out this video with that perspective, saying, hey, do research, because in a sense, you're watching this video to determine this, right? And I will go more in depth about all these different things you need to know. But what's so bizarre, just for lack of a better word, about being a rideshare driver now especially, is there's a lot of legal changes going on city to city and state to state. It's kind of weird, being honest, in America that you have a lot of federal laws, but then state laws, and then even sometimes city laws, right? And they change. In some cities, for example, and let's say Texas or Arizona, in some cities, your car that you have will qualify. But if you live in a completely different city in that same state, your car could potentially not qualify to drive for Uber or Lyft, which is really annoying and frustrating. And that's why I suggest, as weird as it is to say, maybe even just Google, what is it like to be a rideshare driver in Austin, in Chicago, in Denver, etc., etc. Just because every city has its own kind of unique quirks and layouts, not just in terms of how much money you can make or potentially not make, but especially all the legal stuff going on in your area. And the crazy thing too is it can change month to month, year to year, even week to week. For example, here in California, Prop 22 passed a bit ago. When it comes to Prop 22, in my opinion, it's now more worth it to be a rideshare driver in California than it was before. Because with Prop 22, you get like a minimum hourly guarantee and a lot more protection. This depends area to area. Number 2, test out both apps. Now, one of my best pro tips is to download both apps because, as you can imagine, sometimes Uber pays more, sometimes Lyft pays more. It depends week to week, day to day. Sometimes there's more bonuses. On a random weekend, Uber could pay more or Lyft could pay more, and this could change. So that's why I suggest to a lot of drivers not only download and sign up for both apps, but also test both out. You never know. I know a lot of drivers tell me like, well, Mark, Uber just is the king in my area, or Lyft is the king in my area. Always test out both because you truly never know. Another big suggestion I have is make sure you get that sign-on bonus. When you sign up, make sure you use someone else's code or link. And the reason why is if you go to Lyft.com or Uber.com and sign up, you get nothing for a bonus. When I signed up through Lyft, for example, they were having a $1,000 sign-on bonus in Boston, and I didn't use someone's code, so I got nothing. However, if I just even Googled Lyft referral code, I would have gotten that $1,000 bonus. I do have mine in the description if you want to use it. It's completely up to you. I just suggest using someone's code or referral link so you can kick off your ride sharing journey with a nice bonus. But the big thing, like I said, make sure you test out both. In addition, I do suggest Googling in your area other ride sharing apps. There are ones, let's say, that are specific to Phoenix, Arizona, Austin, Texas, Washington, D.C., and more. You never know. Maybe with one of these smaller apps, you actually might make more money than Uber or Lyft. You really never know. And this is a big thing I do want to suggest. I remember when I first started driving, I drove just for Lyft. And I'm like, all right, I'm making good money. Why would I drive for Uber? Started driving for Uber and I'm like, wait, I'm making way more money with Uber. And as you can imagine, once I started making more money through Uber, I was like, wow, ride sharing is actually way more worth it now because of how much more money I'm making. Then, for whatever reason, it went back to Lyft. Now, right now, especially at the time of this video, there's a huge battle between Uber and Lyft. That's always existed, but it's even more heated now, where Uber has been crushing their quarterly goals in terms of their financials. Lyft, unfortunately, not so much. They do have a new CEO, David Risher, and he has been doing a lot to try to improve Lyft. But this is a tricky thing going on that in some ways, for example, when it comes to Lyft, it's kind of a gamble. In some cases, when it comes to Lyft, I know they're trying to push a lot of bonuses to get drivers on the road and make more money. In other cases, though, I've talked to some drivers, depending on the area, who say, look, Lyft actually removed all the bonuses and they're not paying as much because Lyft is not doing well financially. So it could go either way with Lyft. This also could be the case with Uber, although Uber is doing a lot better financially. But again, always test out both apps so you can make the most amount of money. Number 3, vehicle logistics. As you can imagine, if you want to drive, you need a car. You have 2 main options. 1, use your own, which has its complications, and 2, rent, which also has its complications. Now, starting with your own vehicle, remember, if you drive with your own vehicle, it is a bit easier. You just jump in and drive. It's your own vehicle. You have the full control over it. You're already paying for the vehicle, or maybe it's paid off. But a couple of things you do want to keep in mind. 1, you will get wear and tear and depreciation on your car. This means the value of your car inevitably will get lower over time. You know, if you think about it, you have to get more maintenance on your car, more oil changes, tires, all these kind of things. Of course, you're gonna have to pay for gas, but I guess that's true for both a rental and, of course, your own vehicle. Another thing to keep in mind, especially in this year, this is now pretty much the standard in case you didn't know. If, let's say, you go to resell your vehicle, let's say you go to a dealership, one of the first questions they will ask you now is, has your vehicle ever been used for a ride-sharing-like service such as Uber and Lyft? And as you can imagine, the value of your car could go down because they realize, hey, this has been used as a ride-sharing vehicle before. And one thing I do want to say, and this is really up to you and how you go about it, I'll talk about this a bit later in the video, but remember, you can have your own car and still rent a car through Uber and Lyft. Lyft and Uber doesn't really care if you have your own car or not when it comes to renting. And I have some friends who drive full-time who say, hey, you know what? I drive so much, it's actually more worth it to just rent a car because I don't put all those miles, the wear and tear, the depreciation on my own vehicle because I drive full-time and I drive so much. I just want to rent a car. Now let's talk about rentals because it gets very, very, very tricky when it comes to renting a car. Typically, to get the numbers right out on the board, you're looking at about $200 to $300 a week to rent. So as you can imagine, I could go more into the math, but making it super simple. As you can imagine, that means, like say it's $250, make it like an even number. That means you're starting off negative $250 every week. Once you drive to $250 and you make $250, you have only broken even. So keep this in mind. If you're driving part-time, is it worth it? Probably not. Maybe you should not be a driver whatsoever because you kind of have to spend a ton of money to then make money. Of course, though, if you're driving full-time, once you get past that $250 or you break even, everything past that is profit. And of course, like I mentioned, you're not putting depreciation, wear and tear, all these different things on your vehicle. So this is something you do have to weigh out. Another thing I have to bring up is insurance. This is something I mentioned in a lot of videos as, like I said, as times have been changing, there's been a lot more activity of insurance companies saying, hey, I'm gonna insure you, but I wanna know, do you drive at all for Uber or Lyft? This is one of the first questions I ask you. And if, like say you start driving for Uber and Lyft, you don't tell your insurance company you're driving for them, and then you get into an accident, there's a good chance if they find out you were driving for Uber or Lyft, they will not cover you because remember, insurance companies will use any excuse they can to not cover you. And this is becoming a lot more prevalent as time has been going on. And this is why I highly, highly suggest get rideshare insurance. You're looking at anywhere, it depends, anywhere between $6 and maybe $20 extra a month, 100% worth it, just to make sure you're covered in case anything happens. And speaking of insurance-like things, one thing I do want to say as a side note, get a dash cam, 100% worth it, and make sure you get one that films both the outside of your car and the inside of your car. Just in case something happens, like say if you're driving, you get into an accident, and remember, The more that you drive, statistically speaking, the more likely you are to get into an accident. Even if it's not your fault, you have that footage. But in addition, as we all know, whether it's something, horrible happening inside your vehicle or even like a minor dispute with a passenger, you have footage both outside and inside of your vehicle. That way, like say if something happens and Uber and Lyft says, hey, we heard from one of your passengers that you did X, Y, and Z. You say, no, that's not what happened. I actually have dash cam footage. Just get it. Hopefully you never have to use that dash cam footage at all, but you have it just in case. Now, one last thing I do want to mention about the vehicle situation is premium options. So when it comes to ordering in Uber and Lyft, as we all know, that's the typical kind of starting point. But you also have Uber and Lyft XL. You have the luxury options. You have the black options, which pay even more. And I have to mention that because I know a lot of drivers who say, hey, I actually have a very nice vehicle. I started driving mainly for Lyft Lux or Uber Lux or Lyft Black or Uber Black or whatever. I'm making way more money. As you can imagine, those rides, although they're fewer, there have been some sites that have done some studies and found that yes, although you might get less luxury options or black options or premium options in terms of rides, if you do all the math out, you still make way more money because when you do get those rides, they pay so much more. I will say this does depend city to city. Like let's say you live in Vegas or LA or Miami or very like hot spot type city, you can definitely make way more money as a premium driver. However, if let's say you live in a remote part of Ohio or I don't know, just like an area that doesn't have a lot of kind of that clientele that might order that type of ride, maybe it's not as worth it. But remember, if let's say you have like a super nice Escalade, for example, that you could do Uber Black with or Lyft Black with, you could still do regular Uber and Lyft rides. You're not locked in, but keep in mind that if you do have, let's say, a nice Escalade or a very nice vehicle, you definitely want to shoot for those luxury options. Next, the money. Let's talk about the money math, the most maybe important part of this video. Now, first off, remember, your location is the number one factor that determines how much money you can make as a driver. And I'd say, it's tough to give like an exact average, but if I had to say, you're looking at about $20 to $25 an hour on average. However, this is not the full story. This does not include the money you have to spend for gas, for maintenance on your car, and of course, the big kicker is taxes. Remember, you are, depending on your area, but more likely than not, you are an independent contractor, which means you're like, oh great, I'm getting 25 bucks an hour, but taxes are not taken out of that, which means you're gonna have to owe taxes when tax season rolls around. This is something you definitely want to keep in mind, and especially to combine the depreciation on your vehicle, the wear and tear on it, the liability that can come with just being a driver. To some people, it might just not be worth it whatsoever. And this is a big thing I do want to talk about, which is the income spread. I have mentioned this on a bunch of other videos on my channel. What I've noticed, I feel like back in the day, when I first started driving, about 2014, 2015, being a rideshare driver, especially for like the next few years when I first started, was almost like a 6 or 7 out of 10, right? No one really talked too crazy about it. Nobody really hated Uber and Lyft. It was like a steady, good side gig, right? As we all know, the benefits, flexible schedule, you have instant cash outs, all this kind of stuff. And I feel like the waters of the ride-sharing world were pretty calm, in my opinion. Now, they're chaotic. They're all over the place, which is why I kind of want to do this update video. I feel like every year I do a video of should you drive for Uber and Lyft in this year. And I feel like right now, things have never been more all over the place. You have legal issues coming up with deactivation. Uber and Lyft drivers not getting paid enough. There's so much all over the place now. And I've noticed, very similar to the economy, that as we have all seen, the middle class is shrinking, and you either have the upper class or the lower class, and the middle class is slowly getting a lot smaller. Likewise with drivers, I'd say, statistically speaking, about 20% of drivers love driving for Uber and Lyft. And the crazy thing is, they're making more money than ever before. However, about 80% of drivers, or let's say most drivers, hate Uber and Lyft and are making way less money than ever before. This is what's very unfortunate about the money situation, is it's either a 9 or 10 out of 10 or a 2 or 3 out of 10. There's no in between. And yes, there are some drivers I have talked to who say, yeah, it's not bad. And they are kind of in the middle, but it is crazy to say because I interview so many drivers and I talk to some drivers who are like, oh man, I'm making more money than ever before. I'm loving rideshare driving. It's never been better. But most drivers are like, no, it's the worst it's ever been. Deactivation's an issue. The liability's an issue. Insurance is now more of a nightmare. I'm making way less money. Uber and Lyft's giving me way less bonuses, all this kind of stuff. And it's such a crazy spread. And that's why when it comes to the money, I do say 20 to 25 on average, without including maintenance on your car, taxes, all this kind of stuff, all these kind of tricky things that do come into play with being a rideshare driver. But overall, you're getting this huge spread right now that's never been more polarizing ever in the ride-sharing world. And that's what I want to suggest when it comes to the money situation. I think it's never been trickier to determine how much money you can make. However, take, let's say, here in California or more on the West Coast, In-N-Out workers, In-N-Out, in case you don't know, is a fast food chain, one of my favorite fast food burgers, period. In-N-Out pays their employees about 20-ish an hour, and they get benefits even if they're part-time. So it is interesting that at first with ride sharing, it was this amazing thing we can make 20, 25 an hour. In Boston, sometimes I can make 30 or 35 an hour pretty easy, especially when it would snow, sometimes even up to $60 an hour, which is ridiculous. Now though, as the economy's gotten a bit worse, for lack of a better phrase, right? It's gotten tremendously worse, right? I noticed that about 4 or 5 years ago, in my opinion, the average was 20 to 25 an hour. Now, 4 or 5 years later, it's still about 20 to 25 an hour, which brings me to my next point, and that is the part-time temporary situation. My best advice when getting into it, start off part-time. I have heard of people jumping into ride sharing full-time. I suggest part-time because, like I said, you get into it, you might realize, you know what? This is just not for me. Like I mentioned, maybe In-N-Out is paying more. You don't have to worry about all these tricky things. You don't have to put on wear and tear on your car. The tax situation, a lot easier as an In-N-Out worker. And I'm just picking In-N-Out as an example. But I think right now, the only two, I mean, there's a few, but my main two advantages of being a rideshare driver is one, the flexible schedule. That's the biggest thing, right? You're your own boss. You can drive whenever you want for as long as you want. You don't have to listen to anybody. You can take a vacation whenever you want. The second thing is instant cash outs. I could go out, drive for, say, a few hours, let's say 3 or 4 hours. Let's say I make $100. I hit a button, boom, $100 in my bank account instantly. That's pretty awesome, right? Besides that, though, the thing that I've noticed for a lot of drivers is you have to look at this, and this is my best suggestion, as a temporary thing. With deactivation becoming more prevalent, Uber and Lyft favoring passengers more than drivers, and all this kind of legal stuff coming into play, the waters have never been more tricky to navigate being a rideshare driver, which is why I suggest, I guess using that water analogy again, to tiptoe your way in and feel it out. That's my best suggestion. Because another big thing too, and this is very unfortunate, is the upwards mobility. In case you don't know what that means, it's kind of like the main concept in business or getting any job that, like, say you start out as, I know, a cashier at a store. You then work your way up to an assistant manager and then a store manager, right? There's an upwards mobility aspect that you grow and grow. You increase your position and, of course, make money doing it. With ride sharing, that doesn't really exist. And I know there are probably people watching this saying, well, Mark, that's ride sharing. Like, you do it on the side. You do it to make side cash. Like, that's what ride sharing is. But even so, at the end of the day, that is something to keep in mind, that it's definitely something you should look at as a temporary gig. However, I believe that looking both sides, and like I mentioned earlier with this huge income spread, I have talked to drivers who drive full-time who make 6 figures, who are like, hey, I'm making 6 figures driving for Uber and Lyft when I want, how I want. I'm making great money. I get to change my schedule whenever I want. I can go to my daughter's dance recital. I'm making enough money to save up for a bunch of vacations every year with my family. I'm putting a bunch of money in savings, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, driving full time does have a tremendous amount of perks. If, let's say, you are in that 20% category where you're making an insane amount of money, but for most drivers, it's just side cash. It's something you do between jobs, between gigs. It's something you do on a Friday night because you're like, I don't really feel like going out and spending money and everything, but I do want to do something. Why not drive for Lyft and Uber? Put some money away in my savings. And especially if you're looking to drive for Uber and Lyft with all the benefits, instant cash outs, and of course, being able to work whenever you want, there is a unique other option, and that is delivery driving. I want to save this as a bonus point. Now, I have to be honest, and I've said this in a bunch of other videos, I hated delivery driving. Don't like it at all. I like the socialness of Uber and Lyft. Also, I'm not gonna lie, it's kind of annoying to pull up to a restaurant, throw on your hazards, hope you don't get a ticket, run to the restaurant, make sure you're grabbing the right order, and you don't forget their milkshake or whatever. Coming back into your car, you put it in your car, but you wanna make sure it's not in the wrong place in your car. Let's say it falls over and spills. You get to the person's place, and because of the restaurant taking a while or whatever, you get blamed for the food being cold. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. But I do have to say, when it comes to all the tricky things of rideshare driving, I feel like a lot of them do get mitigated with delivery driving. And in addition, in case you didn't know, typically the average age to be an Uber driver, 21 and up. For Lyft, typically 25 and up. So if you're watching this video, let's say you're in college and you're 19 or 20, you can't really do rideshare driving, but delivery driving is a great option. In addition, one thing I have noticed is tipping, I find, is way more common with delivery driving than rideshare driving. I think the good thing about tipping, I will say, I think back in the day, Uber and Lyft actually said, hey, no tipping. We're a non-tipping service. Now, tipping has gotten a lot more common, but even still, I do notice tipping way more prevalent with delivery driving. I think especially too, with delivery driving, you get tipped before you get the food, right? So you're tipping kind of proactively, as opposed to with Uber and Lyft, you're tipping retroactively. And I will say, when I tested out delivery driving, I made way more money as a delivery driver than as a rideshare driver. Biggest thing, like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, test it out. Because in some areas, you actually make more money as a rideshare driver. But in other areas, you actually make more money as a delivery driver. Always test out, slowly work your way into the ride-sharing world, and then see if it works for you.